If you think life in Tudor England was all about banquets, jousting tournaments, and royal intrigue, you might want to think again. Beneath the glamorous facade of history's most famous dynasty lay a world of unimaginable hardship, dirt, and danger. From deadly diseases to brutal punishments, surviving Tudor England was a game of sheer luck, and the odds were rarely in your favor. Let's explore the many reasons why most of us wouldn't last a week in this harsh era. Imagine walking down a bustling street in London, only to dodge chamber pots emptied from second-story windows. Yes, Tudor England had no sewer systems as we know them. Waste, both human and animal, piled up in the streets, mixing with mud and rotting food. The Thames River, once a source of fresh water, became a dumping ground for everything from dead animals to industrial waste. This filth wasn't just unpleasant, it was deadly. Rats thrived in these conditions, spreading diseases like the infamous bubonic plague. The air reeked of decay, and clean drinking water was almost impossible to find. Most people drank ale or weak beer instead, not for fun, but because it was safer than the water. If you're a foodie, Tudor England would have been your worst nightmare. The wealthy enjoyed extravagant feasts of meat pies, roasted swans, and sugary delicacies, but this came with its own risks. Without refrigeration, meat often spoiled quickly. Heavy spices like cinnamon and cloves were used not for flavor, but to disguise the smell of rotting food. For the poor, the menu was even bleaker. Bread and porridge were staples, but bad harvest could mean famine. Vegetables, especially raw ones, were mistrusted as harmful, so nutrition was severely lacking. Salted fish, another common food, was so heavily cured that it could dehydrate you. Medical care in Tudor England wasn't just primitive, it was dangerous. The concept of germs didn't exist, so surgeons rarely washed their hands or tools. Bloodletting was a popular treatment for nearly every illness, from headaches to fevers. Doctors believed bad blood was the root of most diseases, so they'd cut you open or use leeches to drain it. Got a toothache? Dentistry was no better. Teeth were often pulled out by barbers using nothing more than brute force and a pair of pliers. Anesthesia? Forget it. Alcohol or a good scream was the closest thing to pain relief. Surviving surgery or even a minor wound was a gamble, as infections were common and often fatal. Fashion in Tudor England wasn't just uncomfortable, it was deadly. For the wealthy, looking good meant wearing layers of heavy fabrics and tight corsets. Women painted their faces with a mixture of lead and vinegar to achieve the desirable pale complexion, unknowingly poisoning themselves over time. Men weren't exempt from these hazards. Their elaborate outfits often included metal buckles and accessories that could cause injuries. Dyes used in clothing were made from toxic substances like arsenic, which could seep into the skin and cause long-term health issues. Think today's justice system is tough. Tudor England's was downright barbaric. For even minor offenses, punishments were severe. Petty theft could result in flogging, mutilation, or even death. The stocks, a wooden device that clamped offenders by the ankles, were a common sight in town squares. More serious crimes, like treason, came with even harsher penalties. Beheadings and hangings were public events, meant to serve as a warning. For the truly unlucky, there was the infamous punishment of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. And if you were accused of witchcraft, your fate was sealed. Trials were often little more than formalities before execution. For most people, life in Tudor England was an endless cycle of hard labor. If you were a peasant, your day started at dawn and ended at dusk, with hours spent plowing fields or tending livestock. The work was physically exhausting, and the rewards were slim. Living conditions were no better. Most homes were small, damp, and poorly ventilated. A single fireplace served as the only source of heat and light, and the smoke often filled the entire house. Families shared these cramped spaces with livestock, adding to the already unsanitary environment. Born poor? You'd likely stay poor. Social mobility was almost non-existent in Tudor England. The rich lived lives of relative comfort, while the poor toiled endlessly just to survive. Taxes were high, and many peasants were forced to work on land they didn't own. For women, the situation was even worse. Opportunities were limited, and societal expectations were rigid. A woman's worth was often tied to her ability to marry well and bear children. While the Tudor era is often romanticized, the reality was anything but glamorous. Disease, filth, and harsh living conditions made life short and brutal for most people. It's fascinating to study this period from a distance, but it's safe to say we're lucky to be living in the modern age. Tudor England may have been a time of historical significance, but for the average person, it was a world of unimaginable hardship.